All right, and we're live.
Yep. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome in to the great debate of 2019 as we have tonight what I promise to be something that will not disappoint everyone. I am your moderator. I am Walt from Mouse Talk. And tonight we have our host from A Disney Life for Me, the channel that you are on right now. Wonderful channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to Dee and Miguel's channel because they are fantastic people who do tons of Disney content. And we are going to be doing a great debate tonight between Miguel from A Disney Life for Me and Steve from Steve's World, who is also here. And they are ready to go. And what we are debating tonight is a subject that has been going on for a while now. And both of these fine gentlemen, highly educated, incredibly smart gentlemen, that's why I'm just a moderator, are going to be debating whether or not Elsa, the famed Elsa from Frozen, is a villain or not. With two compelling debates and arguments, we are going to let each and every one of them go at each other tonight. And you in the chat will also be a part of this great debate. And you will be, as we go into this debate, we'll be able to ask questions back and forth to both Miguel and Steve so that we can answer your questions and come to a resolution at the end of the night. But we will start, first and foremost, with our host channel, Miguel, who can first introduce himself before we get started on our opening arguments. I just want you both to say hello to the chat. Miguel?
All right, very good. Thank you, Walt, for being willing to moderate the debate. I also want to thank my opponent this evening for accepting the challenge of this debate. Just want to also encourage everybody in the chat, please make sure to tag Walt in any comments or questions that you want him to throw our way, later in the evening. So just be sure to tag him on that. Dee is in the chat as well, so you can certainly tag her and she can kind of communicate some of that to Walt as well, but it'll just be easier if you're tagging those. So I want to thank you guys for coming out. We've been having a chat about this for a long time now, and so I hope, regardless of where we land, that you guys have a good time with it, and that we perhaps are able to teach you guys a few things along the way about the movie and some of those things.
Absolutely. Steve?
Well, first, I would love to thank Miguel for agreeing to this as well. We've been looking forward to this for quite a while. It's days like this that make me feel honored to be on YouTube. And I do believe that if anybody can support the fact of Elsa being a villain, it will be Miguel. I'm up against one of the great philosophical minds of our time, but I will try to do what I can. And yes, I am trying to win brownie points. I am wearing a Walt name tag pin for my tie clasp. So I will try not to let anybody down.
Fantastic. Well,
thank
gentlemen,
you guys, and thank you, Walt, for being here as well to help moderate this.
Absolutely. A couple ground rules before we get started. First and foremost, thank you again to both of these gentlemen for being here. Everyone in the chat, Miguel is correct. What we want you to do, we're going to have a section for questions, but we're going to wait. We're going to table your questions for a little bit later. We're going to let the two gentlemen debate. They're going to have their opening arguments. They'll flip-flop questions throughout the debate, and then we'll get into questions from our chat, those in the chat. So please hold your questions until we get to that point. When we do get to the questions, at me, at Mouse Talk with your question. That way I can know that the question is there, and we will get into them. But we will start first and foremost with our opening arguments, and we are going to start with the host, who is, of course, Miguel from A Disney Life for Me, with his opening argument. He will have 5 minutes with his opening argument, and then Steve will have his 5 minutes. Let me get the timer ready. 1 second for me, gentlemen. And Miguel, when you're ready, you can begin.
All right. So again, good evening to everybody. And I want to thank again my opponent for being willing to take on this debate with me this evening. The topic of the debate this evening is Elsa a villain in Frozen? It is very important that we keep the topic in mind throughout tonight. It's easy to get lost in the weeds when having a debate. That is the key question that we are after this evening. Is Elsa a villain in Frozen? So to start us off, I think it's important for me to be clear on what I will not be arguing this evening. I'm not arguing that Elsa was the only villain in Frozen. I'm also not arguing that Elsa didn't experience reform in the movie. I'm not arguing even that Disney identifies Elsa as the villain. And lastly, I'm not arguing that Elsa wasn't a conflicted character. In fact, she was. And I think this is one of the things that makes her such a great villain. Next, I'd like to be clear on what I am arguing. Elsa should properly be understood as a villain in the movie Frozen. It is my contention that this is established through a cumulative case, meaning that no single line of evidence that I will provide may be sufficient, but when taken together, they make a powerful case that Elsa is in fact a villain. My opponent will have the task of tearing down each of the lines of evidence that I provide and provide an argument of his own to suggest that Elsa is not a villain. So let's start by defining our terms. First, the term antagonist will be important for us to understand. This is typically defined as a character who opposes the protagonist. It seems to me there's no question that Elsa is at least an antagonist in the film. Hans and nature are probably two good candidates for antagonists in the film as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that she's a villain, but I do think it's well established that she's at least an antagonist. Merriam-Webster defines a villain as a character in a story or play who opposes the hero, or one blamed for a particular evil or difficulty in a story. Now, dictionaries don't settle debates, but if my opponent wants to take issue with either of these definitions, he'll have to provide a good argument for why we should take a different definition for the term. So I will argue 3 lines of evidence that Elsa is a villain. The first will be a philosophical point. The second will be a historical point. And the third will come from internal evidence within the film. So first, the philosophical point. Elsa is a moral relativist. Moral relativism is the belief that there is no right or wrong from an objective standard. For example, in her anthem, Let It Go, you see her declare, "It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small, and the fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. It's time to see what I can do, to test the limits and break through." And now listen carefully to the next line. "No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free." This is the declaration of someone who is on the verge of committing evils. Throughout history, it's the villains that are moral relativists. It's the villains who think that what their desires are, that whatever they want to do is the right thing for them to do, and that there is no way to properly judge their actions from an objective standard. And so Elsa's moral relativism sets her in perfect line for being a villain in this film. Is right and wrong really just a matter of mere taste? Is the difference between loving my neighbor and eating my neighbor merely a matter of preference? To reject an objective moral standard is to open the door for all kinds of evil and lack any justification for preferring one action over another. Why is Hercules good and Hades bad? Why is Rapunzel good and Mother Gothel bad? We can only meaningfully say this is true if there is in fact a right and wrong, which Elsa denies. She's also shown building her castle during this anthem, which eventually becomes something that she cannot control. My historical point. Elsa's character is inspired by a Snow Queen, a very dark character. We also see Disney patterns with villains. In most Disney movies, the villains are usually revealed as villains quite early in the film. We don't see this with Hans, who would be the other traditional character that people identify as the villain. Also, Elsa's cape, when she first begins her anthem, is purple. I think that's interesting because my opponent, in one of his live streams, said that Disney oftentimes uses purple to identify villains.
Miguel, 1 minute.
All right. Internal evidence. Who causes the problem for the heroine in this film? The troll asks Elsa's dad if this was, when taken to cure Anna, was this born or cursed? This gives us an indication that these powers are not good. The troll also indicates that despite beauty, her powers are a great danger. Elsa also creates a snow monster that almost kills Kristoff, Anna, and Olaf. And my final point, Anna as a Christ figure. Anna serves as a Christ figure in this film, giving herself up for her sister. And she serves as a more rounded Christ figure by the fact that she follows in the steps of the original Christ figure by not only dying for someone, but by dying for the one who put them in danger in the first place.
There you go. All right, there we go. And that was a little bit over 5 minutes, but we are going to allow Steve the extra time as well. Very good start, compelling argument, Miguel. We definitely appreciate that. Steve, buddy, you are up when you are ready. We will give you a little extra time as well, if needed, to do your opening arguments. And when you are ready, let me know. It is your turn.
Okay, so I think what we have to establish here is the definition of what a villain is versus what an antagonist is. Villain is described numerous times as a cruelly malicious person who is involved in or devoted to wickedness or crime, a scoundrel. It is also defined as a character in a play, novel, or the like who constitutes an important evil agency in the plot. An antagonist, and other definitions of antagonist, include one that contends or opposes with another, and a person who is opposed to, struggles against, or competes with another opponent or adversary. There is no question that Elsa is an antagonist to Anna in this film. So going forward, though, is to establish whether or not she is a villain, which is, again, a cruelly malicious person who is involved or devoted to wickedness or crime, or is she merely a person who is caught up in a circumstance that she cannot control. Talking about personality traits of Elsa, she is caring. She cared for her sister. When she found out about her powers and she found out she could hurt her sister, she locked herself in a room. She led a life of solidarity to protect the one that she loves. She is protective in that regards as well. She loved her so much that she completely distanced herself from Anna in the fear that she may hurt her once again. She is very elegant. She is still worthy of a queen, even though I will acknowledge that evil villain queens could still be queens. But she is fierce. She is a very strong female figure. She is powerful. She is reserved. She is graceful. And these are all characters that most of the time are associated with princesses and queens, as well as could possibly have a dark side to them as well. But most of these are all associated with good traits. And lastly, she is also responsible and patient. And those are traits that help define her character as to what it is and allow her to protect the ones that she loves. My opponent has also defined the antagonist, but failed to define the term villain, for which I think is going to be very important for this. From his philosophical point of view, the moral relativism that Elsa faces is in fact true. There are some points where she doesn't know what is right and wrong, but the fact of malicious intent is not there. It is not her malicious intent to be after the ones that she loves, after the city. Her powers are something she can simply not control. She cannot control them. She doesn't know how to control them. She does not understand how to control them. And when they are finally found out, after she's concealed them inside for so long that's eaten at her and made her lead a life of solidarity, it gets out and she is finally free. The weight has been lifted off of her shoulders and she leaves again, unknowingly causing an eternal winter. For the historical fact, this debate is not based on the Snow Queen from years ago. This is only a debate on whether Elsa is in fact a villain inside of Frozen, which I do not see I do not see how it is comparative to the Snow Queen, because the Snow Queen was an evil person. Even though it is inspired by the Snow Queen, there is no sense of villainy here. And of course, the last part in the factual evidence inside the movie, who causes the problem? The problem is caused unknowingly by Elsa, who is unaware of what she does. She does not understand her powers. That does not make her a villain. She is not doing it, as the definition goes, with malicious intent or devoted to wickedness or crime. Anna loves her sister and continues to go after her, even though Elsa is trying to protect her and everyone else by moving away. And in the rest of this debate, we will define exactly how that protection and that love of her sister to move away from her and not put her in harm's way is a sense of heroism and not villainy. Elsa is not a villain here. She is a victim.
Very good. You still have a little bit of time, Steve. Did you want to elaborate, or are you good?
I'm good for now.
All right. Fantastic. Okay. So that's our opening arguments, folks, for everyone that's in the chat. At this point, what we want to do, we're going to have our two debaters. They're going to spar off with questions back and forth. We will start with our host, Miguel, who will be he will be posing a question to Steve, for which Steve will answer, and then vice versa. Steve will give a question back to Miguel for Miguel to answer. And we will do that for several questions as they have them till we can move forward with the debate. After that point, from there, we will see about coming into the chat and possibly taking questions from the chat. And then finally, from there, they will do their closing arguments. Correct, gentlemen? Are we on the same page?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Miguel, you're up first. Your first question for Steve. Go ahead.
Okay. Quick point of clarification. I did give the Merriam-Webster definition of villain: a character in a story or play who opposes the hero, or one blamed for a particular evil or difficulty. So I gave the Merriam-Webster definition for that. Yeah, my first question for my opponent here: if Elsa's evil acts are removed from the movie, what is there to overcome for the heroine of this story?
To my opinion, Elsa has no evil acts in this movie, which would make her a villain, and she is clearly not. Hans is the correct villain here, along with some of the Duke of Wesselton and some of the other things that go on. But Elsa has no evil traits, in my opinion. Evil acts, I'm sorry.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Miguel?
Yeah, I'll follow up after. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Steve, did you have a question for Miguel?
You defined going back to the historical point of view, that it was inspired by the Snow Queen. Do you in fact believe that the characters are the same, or that this is a completely different character and one that is not directly based on that story?
Sure. As with all Disney movies, there were significant differences, significant changes made to the story that inspired the Disney version. So I'm not suggesting they are one and the same as far as characters, but I am saying it should not be surprising to us that there would be lingering influences. And so my suggestion, Elsa being inspired by Snow Queen, leads us to believe, or at least we should not be surprised, that there's a lingering influence of darkness or evil in Elsa.
Gotcha. Okay. Steve, does that answer your question, bud?
Yes.
All right. Miguel, we are back to you. Your next question for Steve, if you have one, or if you'd like to rebuttal his previous question.
Yeah. You stated that Elsa does no evil acts. When Elsa, okay, so actually, let me step back. So remove Elsa's actions from the film, right? The ones that you're not calling evil, but that are questionable. Starting an eternal winter, creating a snow monster to chase Kristoff, Anna, and Olaf. Removing those actions, what is there left to overcome in a film like Frozen if you've removed Elsa's actions like that?
Some of the things that are there for her to overcome, number one, is the absence of her sister being removed, along with the difficulty of losing her family. So now Anna is also battling the loneliness that Elsa seeks out for her own sister's protection. There are still, regardless of Elsa's actions or not, Hans is there for a ulterior motive. he is going to possibly marry Anna, and then she's going to find out that there's going to be issues there, or the fact that the Duke of Wesselton is there to become a trade partner and take advantage of the kingdom and the realm itself. There are still several different aspects of which she could overcome, but mostly I think the struggle still remains, regardless of the actions. I still think their struggle remains for the family love that is separating them right now.
All right, perfect. Miguel, does that answer for you?
Yep.
Perfect. Steve, your turn for either another question or if you'd like to do a rebuttal from one of Miguel's previous questions.
Okay. During the movie, going back to evidence from the movie, one of the senses that kind of promote Elsa's character, when Anna and Hans were so excited that they wanted to get married after 5 minutes of knowing each other, Elsa is the voice of reason. She says, you can't marry someone you just met. And she is there to protect her sister, and which obviously turned out to be a good decision. Do you think characteristics like being the voice of reason and protection of people and her sister and the caringness and the love she does have for her family, how are those possibly traits of a villain?
Okay, yeah, and so as I suggested in my opening statement, I think one of the things that makes Elsa a fantastic villain, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 villains in Disney history, is how well-rounded of a character she is. She does have much more than what we're used to as far as a Disney villain, as far as personality and character development. But I would also want to suggest that not only are you observing her actions, you're also putting onto her motives. And I don't think you've established those motives. Elsa would have been very motivated to keep Anna from getting married, not because she cared about Anna, but because she cared about becoming discovered. So she had motives for not wanting Hans in the kingdom in light of her situation with her powers.
Perfect. All right. Steve, does that answer for you, bud?
Yeah.
All right. Miguel, back to you. Again, do you have another question, or would you like to rebuttal something Steve had said previously?
Yeah, so I'd like to know, much of her actions seem to have been kind of overthrown as not intending to, not being malicious. So there is a moment in the film in which Kristoff and Anna are trying to get Elsa to return because of the winter that she has begun. During this argument, during this dispute, Elsa shoots her powers through Anna's heart. We can argue whether this was intentional or not, but even if I grant the point that it was unintentional, if we recall when Elsa was a child and Anna was taken to the trolls specifically said that the head can be easily cured, but the heart is not so easily persuaded. Elsa would have known that her sister was now in great danger, and yet she did nothing to try and assist her sister. How do we not see this as an evil act?
All right.
Due to the fact that it was it was accidental, and it was due to the fact that she cannot control her own powers and she does not understand how to control her own powers. Elsa sent her sister on her way so that she did not cause more harm to her. She does not know how to fix it, but she knows that she can put her sister accidentally in danger because she does not know how to control her powers. It was not done by any means with malicious intent. It was not done as an act of villainy. It was an accident that happens in everyday life. People do things. To protect her sister from further harm, yes, she did not go with her.
Fantastic. All right. So, Miguel, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Fantastic. Steve, back to you, buddy. If you have any additional questions or if you'd like to do a rebuttal to Miguel.
I would like to start by saying that the only issues I see here with Elsa for acts of villainy, and I'm going to want specific acts of villainy here. The only thing that she has is that she has a temper and she does not know how to use her powers at this point in time. Elsa has been locked up pretty much since the age of 5. At the age of 18, she loses her parents. Now the only person she has left in this world is her sister. And at the age of 21, she's coronated and then it is revealed that she has powers. For somebody to keep something bottled inside for 16 years and then going back to what you claimed in the song Let It Go from I'm Free, a great weight has lifted. And she is now that it's exposed, she does not know she put off the eternal winter. Now that it is exposed, though, she goes back to a life of solidarity where she knows now it's out, she's free, everybody thinks she's a monster. That's okay with her. She is now free. What in any of those actions, we're having to live with something so long, could possibly be an act of villainy and could lead to the moral relativism, I cannot say that word, to be a negative thing.
Miguel?
Okay, so first I'll address the last part. Moral relativism is always bad because the moment we embrace moral relativism, we have no ability to make sound judgments about what is right and wrong. And I just saw some people in the chat suggesting, but isn't this kind of the case? No, I want to be careful. This is a family-friendly show, but typically I would list off some extreme examples that we would say if someone were to look at this action, they would be mistaken if they don't identify it as evil. Moral relativism opens the door to those kinds of actions because then it's ultimately just a person's, taste or desire. As with the example that I gave, the difference between loving our neighbor and eating our neighbor becomes a matter of preference rather than a matter of right and wrong. So that's moral relativism will always lead us down a dangerous trail, which she explicitly states in her song. But I will also give an analogy, and I just want to be clear here that this is an analogy, so I'm not saying that all the details are perfect, but I think it's a helpful one. We think of the child that was extremely sheltered by their parents as a young person, not allowed to express themselves, not allowed to seek freedom, not allowed to be themselves. They then go off to college. And we know what that stereotypical college sophomore is like. Breaking free from the bounds of their parents and just kind of living it up, so to speak. Sometimes very foolish decisions are made in those moments. The fact that the parents contributed to some of the frustration and some of the actions by restricting their child does not excuse the child from their actions. So does Elsa have a legitimate grievance against her parents and what they did to her as a child? Absolutely. It doesn't excuse her actions. One specific example that I think is clear from the film, my opponent suggested that after shooting her sister through the heart with her powers, she sent her on her way in order to try and keep her safe, except for the fact she sent her on her way with a monster following her, a monster that was prepared to do serious harm to Kristoff, Anna, and Olaf. So I don't think we can just impugn good motives when the film doesn't give us evidence for doing so.
All right, Steve, does that answer your question, bud?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Steve, we are back to you with your question for Miguel, if you have one, or if you'd like to do a rebuttal.
I think it's my question.
Oh, it is. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies. Right. I'm sorry. Miguel, back to you if you'd like to ask a question or a rebuttal. My apologies.
Okay. So I'd like to ask you, and I think we've all known people like this, in cases in which people have uncontrollable anger and they act out, right? Do we not hold those people accountable for not learning to control that which causes them to do harm to others?
Yes, we do. And Elsa can be held to that same standard, although there are also different leniencies for the fact of whether something is done with malicious intent or if it was accidental. For instance, in this world, if you're driving a vehicle and something happens and you unfortunately kill somebody, that is a lesser sentence than if you went to intentionally murder someone as well. So there are different levels of that, of holding that responsible. But everything that Elsa does in the ice castle with the monster and all those different instances is out of protection. She wants people to leave her alone. She wants to be left alone so she doesn't harm people. She created Marshmallow to keep Hans and Anna out, and he had the chance to cause bodily harm. He numerously told them to leave and even holds them upside down and says, "Get out." And then, he had his chances to do bodily harm. He was not there to do that. He was there as a protectorate for the castle and for Elsa to keep people away. So yes, Elsa could be held responsible for her actions, but her actions have not been anything of villainy and would be at a much lessened sentence, such as paying a fine.
Okay, there you go. Miguel, bud, does that answer your question?
Yep.
All right. So Steve, we are back to you. We will let Steve answer. Steve, question or rebuttal?
I'll go with a question.
All right. And then what we'll do, if it's all right with you, gentlemen, we'll do each one of you one more question, and then we'll get into the chat and let some of the chat do the question. So Steve, you'll go, and then we'll do one more round for both of you, and then we'll get into the chat. Okay?
Yep.
All right, gentlemen. Steve, your turn.
So throughout the movie, Elsa, again, we're only talking about whether Elsa is a villain in the movie. Throughout the movie, Elsa, her main conflict is with her not understanding how to control her powers. She does what is in her mind the best things to do that can remove her from the situation so that she does not cause more harm. Towards the end of the film, Elsa realized that love is the trigger to controlling her powers. She possesses these characteristics the entire time, and when she gets to the very end, she understands that sacrifice and love is how to control them. She learns how to control them, and a genuine smile comes back to her face when people can finally realize that she's not a monster for the way she's been treated, but that she is a loving person, and then they can all live happily ever after. What, during that time span, would you argue that fear is her greatest villainous weapon, or would you argue that there is something deeper that is not shown?
You go.
Yeah. So I will make two quick points here. One, you used the word sacrificial for her. I don't think that's been established here this evening. And that'll tie into my last question to you. But so is fear her driving force? Again, I'm hesitant to try and impugn motives, but I can grant that for the sake of the debate, that much of what she's doing is rooted in fear. Again, why people do things is relevant to the discussion, but many times actions in themselves are punishable for the very actions that they are. And so the fact that Elsa was afraid, the fact that Elsa's parents were not very good parents, does not excuse the way she went about handling these situations.
All right, there you go. Steve, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Miguel, we are back to you for your final rebuttal or question to Steve. Go right ahead.
Okay. So I will just point us back to my last line of evidence for this final question, and that had to do with Anna being a Christ figure. Steve, would you grant that the story, the plot of the film is much more developed, well-rounded, and deep if we have Anna being sacrificial for the person who was causing her harm?
See?
I do, but that is also, first off, that is also something that did not happen. So we're just talking about whether it's inside this story or not. But on that regards, sometimes sacrifice is the way we discover things about ourselves and discover what is good and wrong in the world. And in this case, Elsa, there is no doubt that she still loves her sister. Everything she does is out of a motive for protection and so that she does not harm her. When she realizes when they take her forcefully to drag her back to the Arendelle to put her in shackles, she has to break free again because there is nothing else she can do. Towards the end, she realizes that she has to help. There's nothing else she can do. And she realizes how bad it is when she sees that she fights alongside her sister. And then she is willing to, for everything that she's been battered and been through, she is willing to be destroyed by Hans until Anna comes in to save her. Yes, Anna, the sacrifice of Anna is what helps Elsa realize the powers that she has and how to control them, but that is the job of the heroine, which is indeed Anna.
All right, there you go. Miguel, buddy, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. And Steve, final rebuttal or question back to Miguel, and then we will get into the chat for questions as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to rebuttal just back to another point. So we talked about Elsa sending them away. We talked about Elsa creating a monster to defend the castle. We also talked about, my opponent talked about Elsa striking Anna in the heart. Elsa made it quite clear that she did not want people there. Elsa made it quite clear that she wanted to be left alone. During this moment that we keep forgetting that we mentioned her with the heart, we failed to mention that she is being attacked by several people and that she is trying to hold different things at bay while trying to protect herself and not harm anybody else. And in that moment, yes, Anna is struck. At the same time, Elsa made it very clear that she did not want her to be there. And in self-defense, when somebody is trespassing on your castle, in this case, those acts are looked at in self-defense when you're being attacked by multiple people.
Okay, there we go.
So I get to comment on that.
Yes,
right?
you do. One
Okay.
comment back. Yes, sir.
Okay, so real quick, so I again, granted that it wasn't intentional, but I do think it's important for us to keep in mind that despite Elsa's wishes to be left alone, the reason why Kristoff and Anna were not obligated to leave her alone is because she caused a winter that was affecting people's lives. Think back to the scene that goes back to Arendelle, where people are begging for blankets and warm food, so they have an obligation to continue to pursue Elsa until they can resolve this issue of the winter. And I think that two scenes got conflated, because if I'm recalling the movie correctly, the storming of the castle does not happen until after she had already shot Anna through the heart. It was Anna and Kristoff that were there. When Anna and Kristoff leave, then you have the attacking of the castle led by Hans and others. So those would just be my closing points there.
Perfect. All right. So there we go, folks. That is our questions back and forth between Miguel and Steve. We'll give them a second to take a drink of water, take a breath for a second here. And now we are going out to the chat. This is where you have your chance to ask questions to Steve or Miguel. I would ask that in the chat you please pose your question. Let me know who the question is to. Put it at Mouse Talk so I can relay the question to them and who you are asking this question to. So we'll give everybody a second here until we see some questions come in. And again, I have to see at Mouse Talk so that I know this is the question from who it is, and I'll be sure to introduce you as well. And yes, everyone is doing fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, so Dougie says he can't tag on mobile, but don't we accept that inaction against evil condones evil, and so is an evil act in itself. Then the fact that Elsa is unwilling to try to fix her mistake to both. Now, Dougie, are you posing this question to Steve, or are you posing this question to Miguel?
I think when he says to both at the end there, he's saying it's to both.
He's asking to both. Okay, well then, Miguel, we'll let you go first.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree that that's certainly part of what makes Elsa culpable, is her lack of engaging actions of hers, whether they were intentional or unintentional, but that were causing harm to others. So I believe what Dougie has just laid out is another reason for holding her as culpable for some of the damage that took place.
Okay. Steve?
I still fail to see where this is an act of evil. Things happen on accident all the time that we do not consider things evil for. And at the same time, she made it quite clear and quite known that she was to be left alone. She did not want to cause harm to other people. She did not want to cause further harm to her sister. And for that, she did the only thing she knew how to protect her out of love, and that was to distance herself from her. In an accidental display of not being able to control her powers, she accidentally struck her sister. That is not an act of evil. That was an accident in which Anna, she would have listened, would not have been there in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay. Next question is from Perfectly Catch. He doesn't say specifically who it's for, so I'm going to let both of you just very quickly. Do you think the Rock Moss people are to blame? Miguel?
I'm assuming those are the trolls.
Yeah, I think that's
yeah. I don't think so. I did see some more conspiratorial stories out there about blaming the Rock people. It seems to me that their intentions are good, but not only their intentions. They offer wisdom, and they help both when the girls are young and when the girls are older.
Okay. Steve?
I don't see them as the cause of the problem, but I do think they could have helped it more. I think that they could have done a better job to educate Elsa when she was younger on how to help control her powers. I think her father could have taken her there more to learn. They could have been being that wise with the wisdom that they had. They definitely could have assisted in that situation to help Elsa be able to control her powers.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Next question is from Dave Houston. Dave, and this is going to be posed to both of you. He doesn't have anybody in specific. He says, did she even know she caused and never knew about the bad winter? That's from Dave Houston. Miguel, I'll start with you.
Can you repeat that one? You cut out for a minute.
Yep. So Dave Houston asked, did she even know she caused the winter? She left Arendelle, made her castle, and never knew about the bad winter. That's from Dave. Miguel, did she know?
So it appears not initially. If you think back to the scene in which Anna meets Elsa in her ice castle, Anna lets her know. There's actually this song that they're singing back and forth. It's a very dramatic moment between the two, in which Anna notifies her, lets her know that she has set off an eternal winter.
Okay. Steve?
She does not initially know the fact that she has set the initial winter off. And once she has finally been relinquished of all this weight on her shoulders, and she's finally free when they do tell her about it, she doesn't know how to control her powers already. So there is no way that she can know how to fix the problem either. But she does not know that there's a winter until they come find her to tell her.
All right. Thank you very much. Next question is for both of you, and it is posed by Sawyer in the middle. And they say Stockholm Syndrome is a condition which causes hostages to develop a psychological alliance with their captors during captivity. Do you believe Elsa is an evil mastermind that has? Miguel? Do you need me to repeat it?
No, that's okay. I would not go that far. I don't think that that's the case. I believe that Anna's love for her sister was genuine and unconditional.
Okay.
So I don't think that Anna was somehow deceived or deluded that her sister was this great sister that she's worthy of dying for. I think Anna's sacrifice for Elsa was an indication of Anna's love for Elsa, not what she thought Elsa was worth.
Okay, gotcha. Steve?
I agree with Miguel. I don't think that is portrayed here. I think she is just a person that's had a great weight on her shoulders for 16 years, and when she finally, we've all been there, we know what that feels like to get that weight off our shoulders. That's all I think that we see here. I don't think she's an evil mastermind by any means.
All right. Thank you both for that. Next question is posed by Donna Jaworski, and she asks, this is for both of you, no one specific. She says, shouldn't the parents bear responsibility for this and how they handled things? Miguel?
Absolutely. Absolutely, the parents do play a role in this, and not an unimportant role. However, that does not sway this discussion one way or another, because the key question would be, is Elsa still responsible? We can look at our justice system, and it's certainly flawed, but numerous people who can all tell you a story about hardships in childhood and difficulties with parents. We don't excuse actions of an adult simply because they had a difficult childhood.
Okay. Steve?
The parents, I don't blame the parents. I think the parents could have aided in the situation, but there's no blame to be put on them. They handled it. This is something that was new to them as well as it was to her. They're not inside her. They can't figure out how to control it as well. They could have been more sympathetic and more helpful, but there's not blame to be put there as for the reason why Elsa is the way she is.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. So I think this next question, and you gentlemen, I'm going to pose it to both of you, but I think this one is specific for Steve. Kay Atwood says, if Steve is putting some of the blame on the trolls and Elsa's parents, after her parents passed away, could she not have gone to the trolls for help? So Steve, I'll start with you because I think this one's posed to you. Your thoughts?
Again, I don't put blame on the trolls or the parents. I think they could have aided more, and maybe with the wisdom as a collective group could have found a better way to handle the situation, but I don't put blame on them. And since there was not that, Elsa didn't really know the trolls from what we can tell, because we don't see her father take her there. She went there one time, and that I don't even know if she went with them, to be remembered. I can't remember that part of the movie, but regardless of that being said, there was not a lot of interaction with the trolls. If you're going to try to go gain something from somebody you've met one time, that trust doesn't exist there. That level of comfort and somebody that you can go confide in and get the answers you look for, it's not there. Again, I don't put blame on the trolls or the parents, but what I do is say is that they could have aided in the situation better. Maybe they could have handled it better and helped Elsa grow to understand what she was.
Okay. Miguel, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily disagree with Steve. I think certainly Elsa is suffering because of the sins of her father. So that does affect her. But even if we wanted to put part of the blame on the parents, part of the blame on the trolls, which Steve says he's not, but even if we did, at some point Elsa has to bear her, has to be responsible for her own decisions. So yeah, I'm not sure that necessarily sways it one way or another.
Okay, great. All right, we'll take a few more questions. I do have one from Mike Wheeler. This is directed directly at Miguel. Steve, I will give you a chance to comment on it as well, but I do want to get Miguel first. Miguel, from Mike, he says, Anna even said in the movie, I am the one to push her to do this. So how is it Elsa's fault directly to the internal winner of the town? Does that make sense?
Sure. And I'm sure that we have all experienced at times in which loved ones make poor decisions, bad decisions, even evil decisions, and we almost want to take part of the blame because we feel so bad that they find themselves in this situation. And I think that's all you're getting from Anna there. Anna's certainly not to blame. What was Anna pushing her for? For more freedom in the kingdom, for more engagement with their people, and Elsa reacted the way that she did. So Anna certainly felt some guilt, but I don't think that her declaration of that for us as viewers who get to see the entire story play out, I don't think that obligates us to agree with Anna there.
Steve, did you want to touch on it?
Yeah, provoking someone in this case, in which Anna has, provoking someone also can bear some responsibility that needs to be shed as well. And again, when we talk about Elsa having to be responsible, and Anna has to be responsible as well for her actions, but at the same time, the actions are accidental and out of love and not out of malicious intent.
Okay. All right. We will go with a few more questions to wrap it up. Miguel, this one is directed at you. It's from Perfectly Cat. She says, do you think that Elsa is a reformed villain now, or do you still feel she is a villain in the upcoming movie?
Yeah, great question. And I absolutely believe that Elsa is reformed. And again, I think we miss that in the story arc if we don't properly identify Elsa as a villain. She is reformed. That somebody had mentioned in the chat that they see this as a theme of love overcoming fear. Absolutely. That is what happens. Love overcomes fear. Anna was driven by love. Elsa was driven by fear. Anna did good, Elsa did evil, love wins. And so I think we miss that very important arc of the story, the reformation, the redemption of Elsa, if we don't properly identify her.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Steve, did you want to touch on that?
Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, hold on one second. Let me go back to it real fast here. Perfectly Cat says, do you think that Elsa is a reformed villain now, or is she still a villain in the upcoming movie? So
I don't think she's a villain at all. I do think her character is reformed to some degree. It's called character development, which I think we all see in all movies, but I do not think that there is any villainy here whatsoever. So as far as being a reformed villain, no. But I do think she does show great character development.
Okay. So we're going to do 2 more questions. We have one from Donna and we have one from Dougie at Walter Graham's, because we are coming up on an hour. I don't want to go over too far. I didn't know how far we were or weren't going to go, so I don't want to hold everybody. But Donna Jaworski has a question for both. She says, but isn't it Elsa's fault either, because she was born this way? How can she control powers that she doesn't understand? Miguel?
Yeah, and so again, this would come into her adulthood. We can blame all kinds of things. We are all born with certain propensities, certain inclinations, and yet we are held responsible for the way in which we control or don't control those things. We're still responsible for our actions. So I'm certainly not suggesting that Elsa, the 8-9-year-old Elsa at the beginning of the film, was already a villain, but certainly her failure to continue to grow, to continue to develop, to continue to try and deal with this problem, I would suggest that we're all born with certain inclinations, certain desires that are not good. And it is our responsibility as human beings, as rational creatures, to overcome those things, and we will be held responsible if we don't. So I don't think the fact she was born that way is excuse for her actions.
Gotcha. Steve?
To some degree, I do agree with Miguel. We are held responsible, but that does not necessarily mean that an accidental action leads to someone being an evil villain. And on top of that, you do learn and you do grow. We're talking about a period of time of a year in which she may or may not be a villain. So the first 21 years of her life led up to this part in time, and then during that year, during that one moment of darkness, where not even darkness, where she just the burden was lifted by accidental revelation of her powers. She chose to leave for protection. When she comes back, when she does understand her powers, that is how she does become understanding and controlling and character developed, shows great character development to becoming that. So the whole aspect of us talking about this villainy is during the course of less than a year.
Okay. So final question is going to be from Dougie, Walter Graham's. It is posed to Steve. I will give Miguel a chance to rebuttal it as well. But Steve, the question is evil intent really a prerequisite for villainy? Lots of sympathetic villains in media. Because I'm a dork and it's on brand, Mr. Freeze in Batman, who wants to save his wife. That's just kind of an example. Question understood?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So no, evil intent is not necessarily a prerequisite for villainy. Things that happen are prerequisites to lead us to evil intent and evil actions. And the difference between this and Batman is when Elsa is trying to protect herself and just protect her family and protect the others around her by distancing herself from them. That is accidental with what happened to Anna. Mr. Freeze chose to maliciously harm other people to save one person. That is a completely different aspect for what drives them to use their powers. Elsa had one accidental incident. Mr. Freeze intentionally harmed others to save one person.
Okay. Miguel, final words.
Yeah. So if my opponent is conceding that intent is not what is necessary for villainy, I think he's just conceded the debate, because that's what we heard all night long, is that Elsa's intention was this, Elsa's intention was this, Elsa's intention was this. I think that Dougie asked a very good question in the chat, and I think we can agree that evil intent is not necessary for evil actions. A villain is someone who is blamed for a particular evil or difficulty in a story. And so I think that, again, we've got good reason to believe Elsa is, in fact, a villain.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we are at the point now where I want both of you gentlemen to give your final remarks. We're going to start with you, Miguel, and we'll let Steve finish up, give him the last word on the final remarks. And then we're coming out to the chat, and we're going to let the chat vote on a winner tonight. I think this has been fantastic so far. But before you vote, folks, let both of these gentlemen give their final remarks, please. So, Miguel, we'll start with you, buddy. Go ahead.
All right. So once again, I want to thank my opponent. He has given us everything we could have hoped for, and a very lively debate this evening, so I'm thankful for that. So again, just a quick recap. I suggested that Elsa, we have 3 lines of evidence that suggest that she was, in fact, a villain. First, a philosophical point, that Elsa is, in fact, a moral relativist. My opponent seemed to concede this point, but didn't actually suggest why this became irrelevant to the discussion. A historical point regarding the influences of the film, but also Disney patterns of villains, to which my opponent did not quite respond, regarding early introduction of villains, the purple cape at the beginning of her anthem, though he did briefly answer the situation regarding the Snow Queen. And then lastly, the internal evidence. What we got for each of my lines of evidence regarding internal evidence was basically intent, intent, intent. And it seems to me that my opponent shifted then in answering that final question asked by Waltograms. So these are my concluding thoughts. It seems to me that my opponent has not sufficiently torn down my 3 lines of evidence to suggest that Elsa is not, in fact, a villain. My opponent also oftentimes just impugned motives to Elsa without actual argumentation from the film itself. If rightfully seeing Elsa as a villain in Frozen allows us to appreciate the film in a more complete way. In fact, Hans makes a very flat and uninteresting villain. We must ask ourselves, why, whether consciously or subconsciously, has this film reached so many people and been such a hit? Why has this story resonated with people so much? It seems odd that a movie with a really poor villain, which would be Hans, would have that kind of impact. Also, understanding Elsa as a villain makes Anna's act of true love all the more powerful and allows us to appreciate the film for its richness and beauty. I'll close with this. Throughout this evening, we had my opponent continually say that Elsa committed accidental acts and repeatedly asked to be left alone. So I'll leave you with an analogy. If someone accidentally lights a building on fire, perhaps didn't know that right away, and leaves, then people come to notify the person that he, in fact, lit a building on fire. And this person says, "Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone." And the people don't leave them alone. And this person goes on to then light those people on fire. It seems that this person would not be justified in being asked to be left alone. The acts that they committed, whether intentional or not, needed to be dealt with. And Elsa's refusal to engage with the harm that she had caused is itself an act of villainy.
There you are. Okay, well, thank you very much, Miguel. We definitely appreciate that. Steve, my buddy, you have the final word. Go right ahead with your concluding remarks.
I would also like to thank Miguel for a very spirited debate. I knew it would be an uphill battle with the philosophical mind that he has. Walt, I would also like to thank you for moderating. It's been a pleasure. Going back to some of my opponent's points, though, moral relativism, I have acknowledged that she may struggle with some moral relativism, but there is a difference between her going to a castle and just saying, I'm free, what's right, what's wrong, being by herself with no malicious intent to harm others versus moral relativism that could pose into a true villain. That doesn't, I did not disparage that remark at all, that whether she may possess some of it, but it is on a whole different level than those of villain status. And as far as not going over the early intro of villains, again, we are not comparing past villains to this movie. We are just talking about whether or not Elsa is a villain in the movie Frozen. And towards the end, I did talk about intent a lot, but there's a difference between accidental intent and evil actions. A villain is defined as a cruelly malicious person who is involved in or devoted to wickedness or crime. And that is not what we see here in Elsa. She had accidental moments for not being able to control her powers, for which, yes, she could be held responsible for, but not for malicious intent or wickedness or crime. Elsa is a victim here. She is not the villain. The easiest sense for us to find the true answer lies in the eyes, minds, and hearts of children. They are innocent, and to the dark natures of society, persuasion, and preconceived opinions, their innocence allows for an unbiased truth to ring loud. So I ask children, is Elsa a villain? Cameron from Indiana says, Hans is the bad guy. Elsa is the good guy. End of story. Izzy from Indiana says, no, Elsa is not a villain. She's good. Jaden from Indiana says, I like Elsa. And Abby from Indiana says, Elsa is a role model for young women everywhere. She is a strong, empowered woman and an inspiration to all women. There is no way Elsa is a villain. So childlike innocence in that regards proves to be that Elsa is not a villain. They are not persuaded by society and the other things that we are blinded by. Elsa was someone that was treated differently because of the way she acted, her abilities that she possessed, or the way that people saw her. She was bullied and made fun of, and the only thing she knew to do was to escape by herself to protect those around her and herself. We all have conflict we wrestle with inside, but it's the methods in which we resolve that conflict that help to mold our character and determine our inner being. Elsa was faced with a conflict that she could not control. She left, but at the same time, people kept forcing her. Her actions were completely out of accidental intent, not malicious intent. And just like all of us, we've all sinned. We've all strayed from what is perceived as good and right. Elsa is not a villain. She is like us. She's you, she's me, she's all of us. She's human. Again, a villain is a cruelly malicious person who is involved or devoted to wickedness or crime, not somebody that has one accidental mistake. Society will forgive her.
All right. And there you are. That is your closing remarks for both of our debaters tonight. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I hope you both enjoyed this a lot. Lots of great, compelling remarks and information from both of you. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed being here as well. Now it's out to the chat. For fun, I think they're both winners tonight. I love the compelling stories that both of them gave us. I can see both sides of it, but I'm not the one who's voting. It's out to you in the chat. We are going to give it, and we want you to be as, how do I say this correctly, open-minded as possible, I guess, and look at the arguments that both of these smart gentlemen gave you. Steve, an incredibly compelling argument. Miguel, an incredibly compelling argument. Now it's out to you. In the chat, let us know who you think is correct here. Is it Steve or is it Miguel? and we will go, or a hung jury. Maybe you don't have a winner. That's fine too, because that's Andrea's vote. And let's see how we do, Miguel. Let's see how we do, Steve. So far, we have one for Steve. We have a hung jury with Andrea. Shep is biased, but he picked Steve. I'm just kidding. Here's another biased person picking Miguel, but we love you, D. Good job. Perfectly Cat says Miguel. Steve for Karen Cook. Mike Wheeler says I consider both of them winners, but Steve's last remarks, my vote, Steve. Creative Funhouse, Steve. Our John's Miguel. Is anybody counting these?
Oh, I can go back and count. Sorry.
We might need you to, because this is closer than I thought it would be.
Into
Made a valid point. I believe Miguel won the debate. Kay Atwood, Miguel for Holly. Sierra says Steve. Dave Houston says Miguel. One vote each, please. I'm not biased. I was fully for Steve before this debate. It's Miguel.
I unless somebody voted twice, I see 8-6.
I'm in favor of Steve.
Myself.
Okay. So far, we have 8-6, folks. Now, we have a lot more people in the chat. We have 31 in the chat, and that's only 14 votes. Dougie votes for Miguel. I vote Miguel mainly because I agree with him in the first place. I'm very, very, very stubborn and won't be swayed. Okay. LSU mom says Steve. Sorry, you're in the middle, Miguel, but Steve was great. So if I'm not mistaken, Steve, are we at 9-8?
Yes.
Are we all winners? Create Funhouse? Yes, we are. Fun Clubhouse, sorry. We are. All right, so we will give it a couple more seconds here, and then we will wrap it up and find a winner. We are at 9-8, folks. It's really close. All right, we will count it down from 5, and then we will close the vote. Steve nearly had Dougie at some points, though. There you go, Steve. Here's a win, especially with Dougie.
I'll take that.
I know.
So,
absolutely.
There we go. Let's end in a tie at 9-9.
All right, I'm good.
Who did we get?
I'm good with that. Andrea ended up
There
giving
we go. All right, so there it is. So we are going to end it right there.
All right.
We're going to end it with a tie. How did I know that was coming? No, that's great. Actually, I think that's wonderful. I think, again, both gentlemen came up with compelling arguments. Thank you to everyone in the chat. I'm going to let Miguel take over in just a second. I just want to say thank you to everybody in the chat for being very, very wonderful tonight. The chat was really, really interactive. Lots of great questions. Lots of great comments. Lots of people in here. You had like 35, 38 people. It's fantastic. I enjoyed doing this, Miguel, Steve. Thank you, gentlemen, for tagging along tonight. But Miguel, as the host of this channel, please, finish up, buddy.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Steve. I mean, awesome. I enjoyed this so much. So I appreciate you guys that came out. So you guys know this. I'm a nerd. I'm an academic. And so just allowing me to kind of have some of the creative expression through this outlet was meaningful to me. I appreciate Dee allowing me to do this on our channel, and Steve for being such a good sport and playing along. So we hope you guys enjoyed it. I thank you guys so much. Really thoughtful questions too in the chat, so we appreciate that. And just be sure to check us out. We've got one more Sunday, right, Dee? One more Sunday before the Jeopardy, Disney Jeopardy. So be sure to check us out Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've got one more slot for Disney Jeopardy, so whoever wins this Sunday will be joining our 2 other winners. And again, thanks a lot for watching. Those of you who may be watching the replay, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So please make sure to leave your comments down below.
All right.
All right, guys. Have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.